Samurai warfare, way of the warrior. Samurai warfare, integral to Japanese military history, evolved from the late 8th century CE during the Heian period when samurai emerged as provincial warriors. By the 12th century, they had ascended to power with the establishment of the first shogunate, transitioning from military retainers of the nobility to influential military leaders and strategists. The samurai's weaponry was both diverse and sophisticated. Emblematic of their status and the era's technological progress, the revered katana, deemed the soul of the samurai, was part of an extensive arsenal that included the yari, spear, naginata, polearm, and bows, enabling versatility in both close and ranged combat. Samurai battle tactics and strategies, while influenced by Chinese military classics like Sun Tzu's Art of War, were tailored to Japan's unique terrain and societal structure. Emphasizing honor and discipline, these tactics initially favored one-on-one combat, but later advanced to more complex strategies involving large, coordinated army maneuvers. The unification of Japan under Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1603, initiating the Edo period, transformed the samurai from warriors to bureaucrats. This shift marked a decrease in military campaigns and a new focus on governance and societal management, profoundly impacting Japan's social structure by prioritizing education, administration, and cultural roles within the samurai class. Conscript armies. Emperor Tenmu, reigning from 673 to 686 CE, significantly reformed Japan's military structure amidst a succession dispute that he quelled with decisive military action, including effective use of cavalry. In 684 CE, Tenmu issued a transformative decree banning private weapon ownership and instituting imperial conscription, establishing a centrally controlled army that demanded loyalty directly to the emperor. This move aimed to consolidate power and reduce regional warlords' influence, marking an early step toward centralized governance and the later samurai class's development. Conscripts, known as heishi, served in local regiments and were equipped with personal weapons like bows, arrows, and swords, while larger items were communal. The military system was rigorous. Infantrymen trained in coordinated units using heavy shields and weapons like the oyumi, a type of heavy crossbow from China, though its use declined by the 10th century. Despite the structured military duties, many conscripts faced extended service periods, leading to hardship and desertion by the mid-8th century. Military duties were not limited to peaceful times. Conscripts also guarded the capital and defended against threats along Japan's frontiers. The northeastern frontier was particularly volatile, involving conflicts with the indigenous Emishi people, necessitating a specialized military unit, the Chinjufu, established in the late 7th century. Overall, these military reforms under Emperor Tenmu and Empress Jito laid foundational changes that not only centralized military power in Japan, but also set the stage for the development of the samurai warrior class, integrating military service with agricultural life and central governance. Early samurai warfare. The transition from conscript armies to mounted warriors in Japan marked a significant shift in the nation's military strategy, deeply influenced by the evolving social structure and the practical needs of warfare. Emperor Tenmu's reforms in the late 7th century faced challenges as these conscripts, part-time soldiers predominantly engaged in agriculture, were reluctant to leave their farms for prolonged military campaigns. This reluctance was not shared by the higher ranks, who were better positioned to become mounted officers and shoguns due to their expertise and resources, particularly in horseback riding and archery. Mounted warfare, recognized for its effectiveness as demonstrated by Emperor Tenmu himself, became increasingly central to military operations. The mobility provided by horses was invaluable in the sprawling and often rugged terrain of Japan. The high cost and extensive training required for effective cavalry meant that these forces were typically drawn from wealthier or more powerful families, capable of maintaining horses and possessing the necessary martial skills. Consequently, mounted troops became an elite minority within the broader military, gradually shifting the focus from the broad-based conscript army to a more specialized cavalry-centric force. By the Nara period, 710-784 CE, mounted warriors were reasserting dominance, a trend bolstered by continuous warfare against the emishi, skilled in light-mounted combat. This warfare demonstrated the limitations of the conscript system, leading to its discontinuation in 792 CE. The state began commissioning local warriors, better equipped and trained for the specific demands of regional conflicts. The subsequent Heian period, 794 to 1185 CE, which began with the relocation of the capital to Kyoto, saw further developments in Japan's military and governance structures. Notable families such as the Taira and Minamoto emerged as powerful military houses, drawing upon their resources and martial prowess to establish control over significant territories, effectively privatizing military power. These families were instrumental in dealing with threats such as the emishi, as well as pirates and rebels, further undermining the central authority's direct control. The term samurai originates from the classical Japanese verb saburao, meaning to serve, and its transformation into a term for military warriors highlights a significant evolution in Japanese military and social structures. Initially used in the 8th century to describe domestic servants caring for the elderly, samurai expanded by the 10th century to denote warriors performing guard duties in the capital, particularly for the imperial line or the influential Fujiwara regents. This role was embodied in organized units known as samurai dokoro, the way of horse and bow. The way of horse and bow continued to evolve, and the archery duel became a respected way to resolve disputes among samurai. These duels were not only a test of martial skill, but also of courage, precision, and discipline. Archery was highly ritualized, and success in these duels greatly enhanced a warrior's reputation and standing. In the Konjaku Monogatari, a set-piece battle featuring an arrow duel, Yaawase, is described between rivals Minamoto Mitsuru and Taira Yoshifumi. Both leaders, with their respective forces of 500 to 600 men, meet for combat, initially engaging in a collective exchange of arrows. As the battle progresses, Yoshifumi proposes that they settle their dispute through single combat. Accepting the challenge, Mitsuru and Yoshifumi engage in a duel from horseback, a practice reminiscent of the Yabusame tradition. Each armed with a forked-headed arrow, they ride towards each other, exchanging shots. After 3 rounds of arrows, both parties deem their honor upheld and the armies disengage, concluding the encounter. During the Genpei War, 1180-1185 CE, samurai warfare reached a pivotal point in its evolution, marked by significant battles that shaped the political landscape of Japan. This conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans underscored the strategic use of samurai cavalry and the effectiveness of naval engagements. The famous Battle of Dan no Ura, a decisive naval battle, illustrated the sophistication of samurai tactics, where the Minamoto clan utilized the tides to their advantage, leading to a pivotal victory that established the Kamakura shogunate. The Mongol invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281, led by Kublai Khan, marked a profound clash of military cultures and strategies, contrasting sharply with the traditional samurai ethos of individual combat and honor. The Mongol force, a diverse army comprising Mongols, Koreans, and Chinese, utilized tactics that were largely unfamiliar to the Japanese, including mass volleys of arrows and the use of phalanxes of spearmen, along with launching explosive firebombs from catapults. These methods stood in stark contrast to the samurai's preference for single combat and personal challenges, a tradition deeply rooted in centuries of Japanese martial culture. Despite the initial shock and potential language barriers, which might have hindered formal challenges of honor, the samurai quickly adapted to the realities of facing this formidable and unconventional foe. The Mongols' reliance on collective firepower and coordinated attacks prompted the samurai to leverage their own strengths, namely, their adaptability and the cohesion of small units, which were pivotal in their tactics. These units, which consisted of samurai who often had familial or feudal ties, provided mutual support, allowing them to effectively counter the massed tactics of the Mongols. In their first encounter during the 1274 invasion on the beaches of Kyushu, the samurai were initially taken aback by the Mongol onslaught. However, they soon regrouped and engaged the invaders in close-quarters combat, where the samurai's superior swordsmanship was particularly effective against the armor of the Mongol soldiers. By the time of the second invasion in 1281, the Japanese had fortified their defenses, constructing walls along vulnerable coastlines and preparing strategic responses to the expected Mongol tactics. Samurai warriors conducted aggressive naval raids, attacking Mongol ships directly in a bid to prevent them from establishing a beachhead. Despite these efforts, the sheer size of the Mongol force threatened to overwhelm Japanese defenses. The turning point in the 1281 invasion, much like in the first, came with the intervention of a massive typhoon, historically referred to as the kamikaze or divine wind, which devastated the Mongol fleet anchored off the coast. This natural disaster, viewed by many in Japan as providential, played a crucial role in thwarting the invasion and preserving Japan from Mongol control. The decline of Kamakura's power coincided with Emperor Go-Daigo's attempt to restore imperial authority, leading to the Kemmu Restoration, 1333-1336. This period was marked by the heroic resistance of Kusunoki Masashige, who epitomized samurai loyalty and guerrilla warfare tactics from his mountain fortresses. Despite initial setbacks, including Go-Daigo's capture and exile, Masashige's persistent resistance eventually contributed to the fall of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333. However, Go-Daigo's restoration was short-lived, as internal conflicts led to the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate, ushering in the turbulent Nambokucho period, the 1336-1392. Samurai warfare during the Sengoku period. The Sengoku period, stretching roughly from 1467 to 1600, was a pivotal era in Japanese history marked by near-constant military conflict and significant evolution in the arts of warfare. This age, aptly named the Age of the Country at War, followed the turmoil of the Onin War, which had set the stage for widespread upheaval and the rise of the daimyo, feudal lords who would come to dominate Japan's political landscape, transition from mounted archers to spearmen. During the Sengoku period, the iconic image of the samurai as a mounted archer evolved significantly. Economic circumstances and tactical demands led some samurai to fight on foot, and a major shift occurred in their primary weaponry from bows to spears. This evolution is vividly depicted in historical scroll paintings and screens from the era, illustrating the transition to the mounted spearman, signaling a departure from the traditional way of horse and bow to a new way of horse and spear. The limitations of mounted archery, including the restricted angles of fire and the complexity of targeting from a moving platform, were well suited to the stylized combat of earlier periods, which often emphasized individual heroics. However, the experiences from the Mongol invasions and the Nambokucho Wars necessitated a more pragmatic approach to warfare. As battles required the neutralization of mounted archers, employing multiple foot soldiers armed with polearms like the naginata or spears proved effective. The spear, particularly the yari, became the samurai's answer to these challenges. Offering a minimum length of about 3 meters, it provided the necessary reach, better leverage, reach and versatility, functioning both as a lance and a slashing weapon, crucial for combat against both mounted and closely packed foot soldiers. The shift was not just practical, but strategic, allowing samurai to engage effectively with infantry without dismounting. Rise of the Ashigaru. During the early part of the Sengoku period, warfare techniques remained relatively stagnant, adhering to the established samurai traditions of combat. However, as the period progressed, particularly towards the mid-16th century, a rapid transformation in military strategy and technology began. The Ashigaru, initially simple peasant warriors, increasingly became integral to the samurai-led armies. Over the Sengoku period, they transitioned from irregular, untrained levies to a more formally recognized military force, occupying a unique niche within the samurai hierarchy. The Ashigaru's significance grew as they took on roles that previously belonged to the samurai, using massed formations and volleys of arrows or matchlock fire to great effect. Introduction of firearms. The introduction of firearms, brought to Japan by Portuguese traders in 1543, further revolutionized samurai warfare, altering both tactics and the overall approach to battles, design of armor and fortification. Development of castles. The development of castles also became crucial during this period, evolving from simple fortifications into complex and highly defensible structures. These castles served as both military fortresses and seats of governance, from which the daimyo could control their lands and administer their rule. The use of these fortified strongholds, coupled with the new military technologies, enabled the daimyo to exert substantial influence over their territories and beyond. The Ashikaga shogunate, although still in existence, had seen a significant decline in its power by this time, unable to exert control over the increasingly powerful daimyo who had their own ambitions. Many daimyo aspired either to claim the shogunate for themselves or to manipulate its power from behind the scenes. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful figures in Japan, exemplified this ambition. Although not eligible to become shogun due to his non-aristocratic birth, Hideyoshi assumed authority as regent and unified much of Japan under his control. The period's end was marked by the unification of Japan under three successive leaders known as the Three Great Unifiers: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and finally Tokugawa Ieyasu, who established the Tokugawa shogunate after his decisive victory at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. This victory and the subsequent establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate ushered in the Edo period, a time of relative peace and stability that lasted over 250 years. Composition and structure of samurai armies. In the socio-political context of feudal Japan, each domain, known as a koka, was governed by a clan leader or daimyo, who qualified for this title by owning land worth at least 10,000 koku, with one koku being the equivalent of enough rice to feed one person for a year. These daimyo led a military and administrative organization that depended heavily on a network of high-ranking samurai vassals called the kashindan, or gundan. These relationships were based on familial ties, marriages, adoptions, alliances, and even subjugated former enemies, making each kashindan unique and complex. The military organization within each domain varied significantly. The vassals, depending on their income and closeness to the daimyo, were obliged to supply a specific number and type of troops, primarily divided into specialized units such as the Ashigaru, foot soldiers, horsemen, and samurai, as well as personal retainers known as kinju. The latter typically consisted of lower-ranking samurai who served as heavy infantry. The military structure further divided during campaigns into units called sonai, tactical units, composed of 300 to 800 men, incorporating diverse troop types such as ranged units, pikemen, support units, and cavalry. These were then subdivided into smaller groups called kumi, categorized by their weaponry. The kumi were led by kumigashira, squad leaders, with further subdivision into platoons under Kogashira, platoon leaders. At the top of this military hierarchy was the Taisho, general, who led the sonai. In larger campaigns, multiple sonai were commanded by a Sutaisho, commander-in-chief, with the main sonai, led by the daimyo himself, designated as the Honjin, headquarters. The Honjin also hosted an inspector or Metsuke, who monitored and reported on the military conduct of the sonai to the daimyo. Tactically, sonai formations were adapted to the varied terrain of Japan, often deploying ranged units like archers and arquebusiers at the front, followed by pikemen and foot samurai, with cavalry at the rear. Logistic support, including pack horses and non-combatants, was positioned behind the combat units. While typically formations were loose to accommodate the rough terrain, in some scenarios, dense formations were necessary to withstand enemy charges. This complex and adaptable military structure reflects the decentralized and clan-based nature of Japanese feudal warfare, where individual domains maintained significant autonomy under their daimyo, and military strategies were tailored to the specific needs and resources of each clan. Centralized command with decentralized execution. The supreme general, such as Tokugawa Ieyasu during Sekigahara, did not engage directly in combat, but instead orchestrated the battle from a position where he could oversee the entire field. This approach allowed for centralized strategic decision-making while delegating tactical execution to the leaders of each clan-based contingent. This method capitalized on the intrinsic loyalty within the clans, as soldiers were more likely to fight fiercely alongside those they knew and trusted under a familiar banner. Communication and coordination. Effective communication was crucial in managing such a complex array of forces. The role of the Tsukai Ban, messengers or aides-de-camp, was central to maintaining operational cohesion. These highly visible and mobile communicators moved continuously across the battlefield, relaying orders, gathering intelligence, and ensuring that strategic directives were implemented effectively across the diverse clan contingents. To ensure their messages were delivered swiftly and accurately, Tsukai Ban were outfitted with distinctive gear such as the horo, a cloak stretched over a frame, or oversized sashimono, battle flags, which increased their visibility but also their vulnerability to enemy marksmen. Their high visibility was a calculated risk, balancing the need for effective communication with the potential dangers of being targeted. Samurai battlefield formation. In feudal Japan, as armies comprised of various sonai, tactical units, approached the battlefield, they adopted different battle formations known as jinki to suit tactical needs, the organization of the army, and the terrain. The conceptual basis for many of these formations was derived from the Hachijin, the 8 battle formations outlined by Taizong, the second emperor of China's Tang dynasty in the 7th century CE. These classical Chinese military doctrines had to be adapted for Japanese warfare during the Sengoku period. Each sonai within the army was assigned a specific role such as vanguard, rear guard, or support, depending on their composition and the strategic needs of the battle. While sonai typically included a mix of troop types with units like archers, pikemen, and cavalry, the jinkei sometimes necessitated deviations from this norm. For instance, specialized units like arquebusiers could be grouped into skirmisher troops, separated from their usual sonai, and coordinated directly by the kumigashira, squad leaders. The strategic deployment of sonai within a chosen jinkei was crucial, as it dictated both the initial positioning on the battlefield and the potential for tactical adjustments as the battle unfolded. This flexibility and the ability to tailor formations dynamically were key elements of Japanese battlefield tactics during the Sengoku era. Case study. The Shimazu clan of Satsuma Province, known for their adept use of tactical systems on the battlefield during the Sengoku period in Japan, frequently employed a decoy system of attack. This method involved using a decoy force to engage the enemy and then execute a controlled false retreat, enticing the enemy to pursue. As the enemy advanced, they would fall into an ambush set by other Shimazu units strategically positioned on the flanks, with the main body of the army held in reserve. From 1527 to 1600, the Shimazu successfully deployed this tactic on 8 occasions. Notable successes include the Battle of Kizaki in 1573 against the Edo clan, the Battle of Okita-Nawate in 1584 against the Ryuzoji, and the Battle of Mimigawa in 1578 against the Otomo clan. In each of these battles, despite being significantly outnumbered, the Shimazu managed to leverage their tactical system to rout much larger forces, demonstrating their mastery over set-piece tactics and their ability to coordinate movements effectively within their loyal army. However, the tactic failed during the crucial Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, where the Shimazu were just one component of a larger coalition that faltered due to the defection of an ally. Arms and armor in samurai warfare. Arms and armor played a crucial role in samurai warfare, reflecting both the practical needs of combat and the cultural significance of the samurai class in feudal Japan. Here's an overview of the main types of arms and armor used by samurai during various periods. Armor. Yoroi. O-yoroi. This armor was used primarily in the early samurai period, up to the 10th century. It was heavy and elaborate, designed for cavalry engagements. Made of lacquered leather or metal plates, it included a distinctive box-like cuirass that protected the wearer from shoulder to thigh. Domaru and haramaki. These types of armor came into use later and were more form-fitting compared to o-yoroi. They wrapped around the body and were thus more suitable for foot soldiers. They were lighter and offered more flexibility. Tosei gusoku, literally meaning modern armor. This type was developed during the Sengoku period, 15th to 17th centuries, and was influenced by European armor design. Made from iron and steel, it provided enhanced protection and was more practical for mass production amidst the demands of constant warfare. Helmets, kabuto. A samurai's helmet was both a protective gear and a symbol of status. Helmets could be quite elaborate with features such as crests, may-date, horns, wakadate, and other symbols to signify rank and intimidate opponents. Weapons. Swords. The katana is the most iconic samurai sword, known for its curved, slender, single-edged blade. Samurai often carried a daisho, which included a katana and a shorter sword, such as a wakizashi or tanto, symbolizing their warrior status. Pole arms. The naginata, a pole with a curved blade at the end, was commonly used by samurai and foot soldiers. The yari, spear, was another pivotal weapon, especially in large formations. Bows. The yumi, a longbow, was a key weapon in earlier samurai warfare, used from horseback. The use of bows declined as firearms became prevalent. Firearms, introduced by the Portuguese in the 16th century, the Tanegashima matchlock gun, transformed warfare in Japan, leading to changes in armor design and tactics, defensive gear and accessories. Menpo, face guard. These were made of iron or leather, covering the face and sometimes featuring a fierce expression to intimidate the enemy. Sode, shoulder guards, large rectangular plates that protected the shoulders. Kote, armored sleeves, hidate, thigh guards, and sunite, shin guards, completed the full armor set. Firearms in samurai warfare. The arquebus, introduced to Japan by the Portuguese in 1542, had an immediate and profound impact on Japanese warfare. Initially adopted by the Shimazu clan after Portuguese ships landed on Tanegashima, these firearms quickly showed their effectiveness in battle, most notably in Shimazu Takahisa's Siege of Kajiki in 1549. Recognizing the potential of these weapons, Japanese blacksmiths, already skilled from centuries of crafting some of the world's finest swords, swiftly adapted their techniques to manufacture arquebuses locally. This led to a rapid proliferation of firearms across the various warring factions. The rise of firearms facilitated the transition from battles dominated by elite samurai warriors to conflicts involving massed ranks of ashigaru, or foot soldiers, who could be trained to use firearms effectively. This shift democratized the battlefield to an extent, as the power of a well-coordinated volley of musket fire could negate the advantage of heavily armored samurai. The ashigaru, once seen primarily as auxiliary forces, became crucial to the strategies of warlords, necessitating changes in army organization, command structures, and tactics. The successful integration of firearms led to more structured and disciplined military units. Warlords like Oda Nobunaga capitalized on this new technology by ordering large numbers of matchlock guns and incorporating them into his forces, which he displayed effectively in battles such as Nagashino in 1575. Here, volleys of musket fire played a pivotal role, setting a precedent that others quickly followed. Standardization and innovation of Japanese arquebus. One of the key developments in Japanese gunsmithing was the standardization of the bore size, which simplified the production and supply logistics of bullets. Unlike in Europe, where each gun could require a custom-made bullet, this standardization allowed for easier resupply and maintenance of armaments, a small but critical advantage in prolonged campaigns. Case study. The Battle of Nagashino, fought on June 28, 1575 CE, is often cited as a turning point in Japanese military history due to its innovative use of firearms and defensive tactics. Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces faced off against the cavalry-heavy army of Takeda Katsuyori using groundbreaking strategies that leveraged the power of matchlock guns and protective fences. One of the most notable innovations during this battle was the introduction of the three-stage shooting technique, also known as volley fire. This method involved arquebusiers being arranged in 3 lines. While one line fired, the second would reload, and the third would prepare to shoot, creating a continuous and relentless discharge of bullets. This technique maximized the firing rate and sustained the output of firepower, drastically increasing the effectiveness of the arquebusiers on the battlefield. However, recent research has led to the theory that the real cause of victory was something else. To support this new firing method, Oda Nobunaga implemented the use of a defensive fence or stockade, known as a sasumata. This fence was constructed from wooden stakes and other materials, designed to protect the gunners from the powerful cavalry charges for which the Takeda clan was renowned. The fences were strategically positioned to maximize the utility of the firearms, blocking the direct assault routes of the cavalry and forcing them into the deadly firing lanes set up by the arquebusiers. The combination of the 3-stage shooting technique and the defensive stockades significantly neutralized the Takeda cavalry's impact. Traditional samurai charges were disrupted by the consistent, organized volleys of gunfire, which broke their momentum and inflicted severe casualties. This tactic marked a shift from the dominance of cavalry and highlighted the growing importance of gunpowder weaponry in Sengoku period warfare. The Battle of Nagashino is often heralded for showcasing the effectiveness of tactical innovation and adaptation in the face of traditional warfare strategies. It not only demonstrated the lethal potential of matchlock firearms when used en masse and supported by strategic defenses, but also signaled a shift towards more modernized forms of warfare in Japan, influencing military tactics in the subsequent decades. Battle tactics in samurai warfare. Infantry tactics during the Sengoku period. The Sengoku period, known for its intense military innovation and transformation, saw the rise of infantry as the core of Japanese armies, contrasting sharply with the earlier periods dominated by cavalry. The use of ashigaru, or foot soldiers, became particularly prominent, marking a significant shift in the tactics and composition of military forces during this era. The ashigaru pikemen, equipped with long pikes called nagai yari, which could extend up to 8.2 meters, formed the core of the infantry. These pikes, while simple in design, were highly effective against both cavalry and infantry, providing a level playing field for less skilled peasants against more formidable foes. The pike's length allowed soldiers to engage enemies at a distance and provided a defensive backbone and a bristling wall of spears that was difficult for enemy troops to penetrate, which was crucial for maintaining formation and effectiveness in large-scale battles that characterized this era. However, these formations were also rigid and immobile, making them vulnerable to flanking maneuvers and concentrated ranged attacks. To mitigate the weaknesses of pikemen, samurai on foot were interspersed within or positioned behind these formations. These samurai, either dismounted horsemen or those accustomed to fighting on foot, provided the necessary combat skill and leadership to stabilize formations. They were crucial for executing shock tactics and could engage effectively in melee combat using shorter weapons, such as spears and various polearms, to exploit breaches created by the pikemen. In battles, once one formation of pikemen gained the upper hand, the samurai would charge to disrupt or rout the disorganized enemy. Conversely, if their formation was breached, the samurai would attempt to halt the enemy's advance, allowing their ashigaru to regroup. The coordination between ashigaru and samurai was vital for maintaining the integrity of the formation. Ashigaru could also use their pikes not just for thrusting, but for creating disorder within enemy ranks through downward strikes, a tactic noted in later historical accounts, though its prevalence during the Sengoku period itself may be less documented. Melee tactics during the Sengoku period. During the Sengoku period, Japanese infantry tactics evolved significantly, particularly in how formations dealt with threats from both infantry and cavalry. Two principal tactics that exemplify this evolution are yarigarami and yaribusuma, each tailored to counter specific battlefield scenarios effectively. Both yarigarami and yaribusuma required highly disciplined troops capable of executing complex maneuvers under the stress of combat. The success of these tactics depended on the ashigaru's ability to maintain formation integrity and the samurai's readiness to capitalize on created opportunities. Rigorous training was essential, as was the leadership of experienced commanders who could adapt these tactics to the evolving circumstances of the battlefield. Yarigarami, Chenglo-mi, Spear's Entanglement. Yarigarami is a tactic reminiscent of the Western push of pike, involving direct confrontation between infantry units wielding long pikes. This method was typically employed when opposing pike formations clashed on the battlefield. The objective was to break through the enemy's line using sheer force and coordination. Once a breach was achieved, samurai, who were interspersed within the ashigaru or positioned behind them, would surge forward. These samurai used their agility and shorter weapons to exploit the gap, engage in close combat, and disrupt or rout the opposing unit. The high-risk nature of this tactic stemmed from its potential to inflict severe losses on the pike units if they failed to penetrate the enemy's defenses. Yaribusuma, Changchin, Spear Blanket. Yaribusuma was devised primarily as a defensive tactic against frontal cavalry charges and could also be employed effectively against numerically superior infantry forces. The strategy involved forming a dense, multi-layered wall of spears, organized as follows. First row. Soldiers kneeled with their pikes set at a low angle to target the approaching cavalry's underbelly. Alternating soldiers in the line would angle their spears downward, creating a scissor effect with intersecting pike points near the ground. Second and third rows. These ranks stood behind the first, with their pikes held at medium and high angles, respectively. This arrangement created a staggered barrier of spearheads, enhancing the formation's ability to absorb and disrupt the momentum of a cavalry charge. As the cavalry engaged the spear wall, soldiers from the first row would thrust upward at critical moments to target the horses' bellies and legs, aiming to halt or divert the charge. If the cavalry was effectively stopped, the samurai, strategically placed behind the pike rows, would then advance. Utilizing their shorter, more maneuverable weapons, they aimed to dismount and incapacitate the now vulnerable horsemen. Range units. The evolution of warfare in Japan during the Sengoku period featured the prominent rise of ranged units, particularly archers and gunners, who significantly altered the dynamics of battlefields. These units, integrating with traditional infantry, marked a strategic advancement in how conflicts were initiated and fought. Ranged units often comprised a mix of archers and gunners, allowing for versatile engagement strategies where archers engaged specific targets with precision, while gunners delivered powerful, broad volleys. This combination maintained offensive pressure, particularly as archers could continue to fire when gunners reloaded. To protect these vulnerable units from cavalry charges and counterattacks, they were often shielded by movable barriers or stationed behind defensive structures. Small detachments of pikemen might also be assigned to provide a protective screen against enemy advances. Operational challenges included the impact of weather on gunpowder and the limited supplies of ammunition, which necessitated judicious use of firearms. Ranged units typically engaged in early skirmishes to weaken the enemy before the main forces clashed, requiring careful coordination to prevent isolation and ensure support. Bow tactics during the Sengoku period. Sashiagakari, Jishishuankari. This tactic capitalized on the rapid firing rate of bows. Archers focused on suppressing enemy gunners by targeting them with a continuous barrage of arrows, thereby limiting their ability to move and return fire effectively. Ryogakari, Liangshuankari. This tactic had dual applications. It could involve covering the reload times of friendly gunners with arrow fire to protect them from enemy charges, or it could entail a synchronized assault where both arrows and bullets were used in volleys to break enemy lines. Once the enemy was disrupted or began to retreat, melee units would then advance to exploit the confusion and breach the formation. Firearm tactics during the Sengoku period. Kurumauchi, Cheiji-chi. Associated with the Shimazu clan, this tactic involved a dynamic shooting approach where gunners were arranged in continuous rows. As the front row fired and moved to the back to reload, the unit would simultaneously advance forward. This rotation resembled the motion of a turning wheel and required precise coordination and training to maintain an effective rate of fire while on the move. Sandanuchi, Sanduanjichi. Popularized and perhaps refined by Oda Nobunaga, this three-line firing tactic was crucial for maintaining a rapid and continuous barrage of fire. The gunners were arranged in 3 rows. The front row would fire and then move to the back to reload. The second row would then step up to fire, followed by the third, ensuring that the volleys of gunfire were relentless. This system maximized the firepower of the unit and minimized the vulnerability during reload times. Cavalry tactics during the Sengoku period. The transition from mounted archers to a mix of cavalry roles during Japan's Sengoku period reflects the dynamic evolution of samurai warfare due to changes in military technology, tactics, and the geographical and social conditions of the time. As warfare shifted from individual heroic combats to massed organized conflicts, the samurai adapted to new forms of fighting, including the use of polearms and firearms, which significantly influenced their use of cavalry. Types of cavalry tactics. Depending on the clan and terrain. Samurai on horseback adapted their combat roles based on the needs of the battle and the nature of the terrain. Mounted infantry. The role of mounted infantry became the most prevalent use of cavalry due to the flexibility it provided. Samurai would use their horses for rapid movement across the battlefield, dismounting to fight as infantry with a variety of weapons. This role bridged the gap between traditional mounted combat and the need for disciplined foot soldier warfare tactics influenced by the increasing use of ashigaru, foot soldiers, in large formations. Medium cavalry. In terrains conducive to mounted combat, samurai acted as medium cavalry, engaging in scouting, raiding, skirmishing, and pursuing fleeing enemies. They utilized spears and increasingly firearms like the Bajozutsu, a carbine adapted for mounted use. This adaptation highlighted the samurai's ability to integrate new technologies while still adhering to established tactics of mobility and shock impact. Heavy cavalry. Predominantly used by Eastern clans, such as those led by the Takeda, heavy cavalry were deployed for direct charges and to counter other cavalry units. They often wore heavier armor, sometimes including horse armor, and were more likely to use traditional spears, emphasizing the continuity of shock combat in open battlefields typical of the Kanto Plains. During the Sengoku period, samurai cavalry employed specific tactics that capitalized on their mobility and combat skills, both as mounted units and dismounted infantry. These tactics were vital in turning the tide of battle and achieving strategic victories. The primary cavalry tactics used were norikiri, enrich. This tactic involved a classic cavalry charge, where small groups of 5 to 10 horsemen would charge into enemy lines in a potentially wedge-shaped formation to maximize shock impact. This was primarily utilized by heavy cavalry in eastern Japan, where the terrain allowed for such maneuvers. The goal was to create confusion and disarray among enemy ranks, particularly targeting units that were wavering or disorganized. If the initial charge did not achieve the desired effect, the cavalry would regroup for a subsequent charge or retreat to reevaluate the situation. Norikuzushi, enrich. A coordinated charge involving both cavalry and infantry. Cavalry would initiate the attack, creating initial chaos and disruption within enemy ranks. This would be immediately followed by an infantry charge, typically involving soldiers armed with polearms, to continue the assault and capitalize on the disarray caused by the cavalry. This tactic was particularly effective against isolated ranged units or formations that had been detached from the main enemy force. Norikomi, enrich. Often considered a hit-and-run tactic, Norikomi involved cavalry units charging at enemy formations that were not fully organized or in battle formation. The objective was to prevent the enemy from forming effective ranks, thereby creating confusion and weakening their defensive posture. Cavalry might use firearms and other missile weapons to enhance the effectiveness of these charges, further disrupting enemy preparations. Additional strategic uses of cavalry included pursuing fleeing enemies, conducting ambushes, and blocking escape routes to ensure a comprehensive defeat of the enemy forces. Samurai cavalry were also prepared to dismount and join the infantry if the tactical situation demanded it, particularly if an enemy charge needed to be countered directly. Siege and cannons in samurai warfare. Siege tactics were a crucial aspect of samurai warfare, especially as the complexity of conflicts and the structures involved evolved through the centuries. The Japanese adapted and developed various siege technologies, which played a pivotal role in numerous military engagements. One of the primary siege weapons used by samurai was the horokubiya, a type of hand-thrown grenade developed during the Sengoku period, 1467–1615 CE. These ceramic or metal containers were filled with gunpowder and acted as early forms of incendiary devices. Their use demonstrates the integration of gunpowder into traditional Japanese warfare, significantly preceding the widespread adoption of firearms. Another significant siege weapon was the haya, an arrow with a burning head, which was used to set enemy structures ablaze. These were particularly effective against the wooden constructions of traditional Japanese castles and fortifications. Archers would launch these arrows during the initial phases of a siege to create chaos and weaken the structural integrity of fortifications. The adaptation of larger, more complex siege machinery in Japan was influenced by Chinese and Korean technologies. The horo, large protective cloaks, were used by messengers and commanders to protect themselves from arrows and other projectiles. Although not a weapon, the horo represents an important aspect of siege defense, illustrating the adaptation of protective gear in response to the evolution of offensive siege technologies. Catapults, known as stone throwers, ishiyumi, were less common but noted in historical records. These were likely introduced through contacts with the mainland and were adapted to the specific needs of Japanese warfare. Their use was limited due to the terrain and the construction styles of Japanese castles, which were often built on hilltops or surrounded by water, making traditional siege tactics challenging. Siege ladders and towers were also essential during assaults on fortified positions. These allowed samurai warriors to surmount walls and engage in close combat with defenders. The design of these ladders and towers was adapted to be easily disassembled and transported, reflecting the mobile nature of samurai armies. Early adoption and local production of cannons. The introduction of cannons to Japan is closely tied to Portuguese interactions, particularly their gifts to Otomo Yoshizumi in 1551. These early cannons were breech loaders, a type less efficient than muzzle loaders, but nonetheless revolutionary for Japanese warfare. Attempts were made to replicate these European designs locally, reflecting a keen interest in and the beginning of the assimilation of gunpowder technology into Japanese military practices. However, local production initially struggled to match the quality of European cannons, making those imported from Europe particularly prized. Tactical integration and use in warfare. By the late 16th century, leaders like Oda Nobunaga recognized the potential of cannons not just in open battles, but significantly in siege warfare. Cannons were employed to breach fortifications, as demonstrated in various conflicts such as the battles at Nagashima and Kizugawa-guchi, and the siege tactics used by Toyotomi Hideyoshi in 1582 against Mori strongholds. These instances illustrate the growing appreciation and strategic use of cannon to achieve military objectives beyond mere shock and awe, integrating them into broader challenges and limitations. Despite their potential, the deployment of cannons in field battles remained limited, largely due to logistical challenges such as mobility and the complexity of operation. Most cannons were used in static defensive roles or in sieges, where mobility was less of an issue. The geographic and topographical challenges in battles like the Shimabara Rebellion further highlighted the limitations of cannon use in specific contexts, where terrain and other factors could negate their effectiveness. Evolution and standardization. The standardization of bore sizes in Japanese cannon production marked a significant advancement, mirroring similar innovations with small arms like the arquebus. This standardization facilitated easier and more efficient production and supply, allowing for more widespread use in various daimyo armies. This process was part of a broader trend of increasing professionalism and discipline within samurai armies, reflecting a shift from purely traditional forms of warfare to those incorporating new technologies and methods. Case study. The Siege of Osaka, 1614-1615, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu against Toyotomi Hideyori at Osaka Castle, marked the culmination of the Sengoku period and stands as the largest samurai engagement in history. The castle, originally constructed by Hideyoshi, featured formidable defenses including dual moats and towering walls. The initial stage of the siege saw Toyotomi Hideyori fortifying the castle further, including the construction of additional outer moats and the strategic Sanada Maru Barbican under the guidance of the experienced general Sanada Yukimura. Despite the formidable defenses, Tokugawa forces managed to carry out a successful siege, leveraging superior artillery and methodical siege tactics. Large armies were assembled on both sides, with the Toyotomi forces estimated around 90,000 troops, while the Tokugawa army, more reliably documented, brought substantial numbers organized by various daimyo. The Tokugawa forces engaged in several skirmishes and smaller battles to tighten their grip on Osaka Castle, utilizing both land and naval operations to disrupt Toyotomi supply lines and fortifications. A critical part of the siege operations included the use of artillery, where Tokugawa forces demonstrated a clear superiority. Ieyasu had acquired advanced cannonry, including culverins and sakers, which played a pivotal role in breaching the castle's defenses. The Toyotomi forces, equipped with less effective Chinese breech loaders, could not match the range and power of Tokugawa's artillery. After a temporary and deceptive peace agreement, Tokugawa forces resumed hostilities, quickly exploiting the weakened defenses of Osaka Castle. The Toyotomi, despite being well-manned, faced challenges due to the reduced fortifications and strategic missteps. In a series of battles, including the significant Battle of Tennoji, Tokugawa forces decisively defeated the Toyotomi, leading to the fall of Osaka Castle. Notable was the heroic yet tragic resistance by Sanada Yukimura, who ultimately died in battle, symbolizing the end of resistance against Tokugawa rule. The siege concluded with the destruction of Osaka Castle and the death of Toyotomi Hideyori, effectively ending opposition to Tokugawa hegemony and ushering in a period of peace and stability under the Tokugawa shogunate. This siege exemplifies the sophistication of Japanese siege warfare, involving extensive use of artillery, coordinated attacks, and psychological tactics, which were instrumental in Tokugawa's victory and subsequent consolidation of power in early modern Japan. Early naval foundations. Before the prominence of the samurai, local chieftains and the central government utilized ships primarily powered by sails and oars. These early vessels were integral to both defensive maritime operations against pirates and offensive campaigns, such as the semi-legendary invasion of Korea by Empress Jingo. This era laid the groundwork for the naval capabilities that would later be expanded and refined by the samurai class. Rise of samurai naval power. As the samurai emerged as a dominant military class, their involvement in naval warfare increased, particularly during the Genpei War between the Minamoto and Taira clans. The naval battles during this period, especially the Battle of Dan no Yura in 1185, were pivotal. They demonstrated the strategic importance of naval power in controlling vital waterways and supporting ground operations. These battles also highlighted the limitations of the period's naval tactics, which largely involved close-range combat where ships served as platforms for archery and later hand-to-hand combat. Technological stagnation and missed opportunities. Despite these early displays of naval engagement, there was a noticeable stagnation in naval technology and strategy. The design of Japanese war vessels remained largely unchanged up to and including the 13th century during the Mongol invasions. The Japanese naval response to the Mongol threats was reactive rather than proactive, focusing on defensive tactics rather than seizing strategic opportunities to counterattack or raid Mongolian territories. This defensive posture was exemplified by the construction of defensive walls around Hakata Bay rather than an aggressive naval expansion. Naval encounters with the Mongols. The Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281 tested Japan's naval capabilities severely. The initial lack of resistance allowed the Mongols to land thousands of troops. However, the Japanese samurai utilized smaller, more maneuverable boats, effectively in hit-and-run tactics against the Mongol ships. These actions underscored the potential for agile naval strategies, even though they were largely born out of desperation rather than premeditated naval doctrine. Sengoku period and daimyo navies. The Sengoku period saw a resurgence in naval activity, not just in defensive roles, but as an extension of the daimyo power struggles. Major clans like the Mori controlled significant naval forces, which they used to transport troops and control key maritime routes. This period also saw the construction of more specialized warships, including larger vessels with fortified defenses designed to support extensive crew and armaments. Imjin War. Following the assassination of Oda Nobunaga in 1582, Kuki Yoshitaka, who had served as Nobunaga's admiral, transitioned to serve under Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Recognizing the superiority of European naval designs, Hideyoshi sought to acquire such ships to enhance his military capabilities, particularly for his ambitions in Korea. However, the Portuguese, cautious of entangling themselves in Japanese internal conflicts, declined to provide ships. This decision may have significantly impacted the Japanese during the Korean campaigns, where they faced Admiral Yi Sun-sin. Admiral Yi's innovative turtle boats, equipped with protective spiked shells, cannons, and smokescreen capabilities, effectively disrupted Japanese tactics, which relied heavily on boarding enemy ships for hand-to-hand combat. The advanced design and strategic use of these turtle boats allowed Yi to sever the Japanese supply lines, significantly hindering their operations. The failure of the Korean invasion underlined a critical turning point for Japan. Disheartened by the defeat and the challenges in projecting power overseas, coupled with the immense cost of the campaigns, Japan, under the subsequent Tokugawa shogunate, turned increasingly inward. This isolationist policy was further cemented by the Shimabara Rebellion in 1637–1638, which was partly fueled by the discontent of Christian converts against the Tokugawa regime. The suppression of this rebellion, aided by Dutch ships bombarding the rebel stronghold, marked the last significant use of naval artillery in Japan for centuries. Headhunting in samurai warfare. Headhunting was a significant practice in samurai warfare, deeply intertwined with the samurai's social and spiritual beliefs. Collecting the heads of prominent enemies was not only a practical method of confirming kills and claiming victory, but also held ritualistic importance. Samurai presented heads as trophies to their lords, which could earn them prestige, rank, and rewards. This practice also had a psychological impact on enemies, demonstrating the samurai's prowess and the seriousness of their resolve in battle. Deception in samurai warfare. Deception was a common tactic in samurai warfare, reflecting the strategic depth of military leaders. The use of feints, ambushes, and false retreats were typical methods to confuse and manipulate enemy forces. Famous strategies involved luring enemies into unfavorable positions or spreading misinformation to weaken their morale or resolve. The use of deceptive tactics was seen as a demonstration of intelligence and strategic acumen rather than dishonor, embodying the principle that all methods were valid in service of victory. Espionage in samurai warfare. Espionage played a critical role in the tactical execution of plans in samurai warfare. Intelligence gathering on enemy movements, strength, and fortifications was crucial. Samurai used spies, ninja, to infiltrate enemy ranks, gather information, or perform acts of sabotage. Espionage was highly organized, with operatives skilled in disguise, stealth, and the art of not being seen. Information from spies could dictate the timing of attacks, the deployment of troops, and the use of resources, often determining the outcome of battles. Encampments of samurai armies. The encampment process during military campaigns in feudal Japan was a meticulously planned and executed operation, vital for maintaining the safety and readiness of the army. Upon reaching the designated encampment area, which high-ranking scouts had previously selected and marked out with flags, the army would begin constructing their temporary residence. The encampment was designed like a temporary town, systematically organized with paths and restricted areas, ensuring order and accessibility. The soldiers erected marquee-like tents, equipped with pre-made detachable poles and roofs made of waterproofed paper, providing shelter against weather elements. These structures were quickly assembled, demonstrating the efficiency and preparedness of the samurai forces. The perimeter of the camp was fortified with bamboo walls and further protected by banks and ditches, creating a robust defensive barrier against potential enemy incursions. As night fell, the camp was illuminated by torches, and each tent featured candles held in suspended horse stirrups, providing light while minimizing fire risks associated with more conventional methods. Additionally, the camp's security measures included listening scouts and smelling scouts positioned outside the encampment. These scouts were specially trained to detect the faintest noises or unusual scents that might indicate the approach of enemy infiltrators or attackers. Their role was crucial in ensuring the army could react swiftly to any threats, safeguarding the troops as they rested and recuperated from the day's march. Conclusion. The history of samurai warfare, as detailed through various battles and tactical evolutions, reflects a complex interplay of military innovation, strategic depth, and cultural significance. From early naval encounters to the grand sieges of the Sengoku period, samurai warfare was characterized by its dynamic use of both traditional and innovative techniques adapted over centuries. Samurai warfare was not static but evolved significantly over time. The introduction of firearms in the 16th century, initially through Portuguese influence, revolutionized traditional combat strategies. This shift saw the transformation from predominantly sword and bow-based combat to include matchlock guns, which significantly altered battlefield dynamics and tactics. The organization of samurai armies became increasingly sophisticated, evident in the detailed coordination of large-scale sieges and the strategic use of naval power. The composition of forces, often drawn from diverse feudal obligations, showcased a complex hierarchy within samurai armies, blending traditional samurai elite with ashigaru foot soldiers. The tactical deployment during battles such as Sekigahara or the sieges of Osaka Castle demonstrated a high level of planning and logistical organization, incorporating both direct combat strategies and psychological warfare. Samurai warfare was deeply intertwined with the Bushido code, which emphasized honor, bravery, and loyalty. These principles not only shaped the conduct of individual warriors, but also influenced larger strategic decisions, such as the honor-bound engagements and the respect for formidable opponents. The tragic heroism of figures like Sanada Yukimura during the Osaka campaigns exemplifies the enduring legacy of samurai ethos in Japanese military history. The outcomes of major samurai conflicts often had profound implications for the political landscape of Japan. The transition from the Sengoku period's constant warfare to the relative peace of the Tokugawa era post-Sekigahara and Osaka sieges marked a significant shift in governance and social order, centralizing power and ushering in a period of cultural flourishing and economic stability. In conclusion, samurai warfare, characterized by its adaptability, tactical depth, and cultural richness, not only defined periods of Japanese history, but also contributed to the shaping of Japan's national identity and military heritage. The legacy of these warriors is a testament to their significant role in the historical and cultural tapestry of Japan.